For more on this, we're turning now to Martin Saif. He's a senior fellow at the American University in Moscow. Martin, thanks for being with us today. So you recently penned an article about how over the past 17 years, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has grown without any attention from the West. For many people that are watching now, this might actually be the first time that they're hearing about the SCO. Can you briefly describe to us what the SCO is? And if we're not hearing much about it in the West, is it because of willful ignorance?
It's certainly willful ignorance. The SCO is the largest security organization in history and the most successful of the 21st century. It has had a vastly greater success over a far larger area than NATO has in maintaining international security. It has two major nations, two nuclear superpowers, Russia and China are the key members, and 4 of the 5 Central Asian nations are also members.
Yeah.
But now, of course, India and Pakistan, both giant nuclear capable nations, have joined as well, and that is an enormous achievement for the SCO.
And just days ago, the SCO summit went off without hitch, unlike the turbulent G7 summit just weeks before. The SCO welcomed, as you said, India and Pakistan into the group. Some people might be quick to blame the rise of SEO on Donald Trump, but you argue that this actually started back in 1998 with the bombings in Kosovo. Can you explain that for us?
Yes, certainly. As Russian diplomats warned NATO and the US at the time, the decision to bomb Kosovo by President Bill Clinton, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, was taken without recourse to international law, without recourse to the UN, without approval from the United Nations Security Council. It was an precedent-breaking and establishing event, and it served notice that the United States and its allies would not feel constrained by the UN Council or the veto powers of Russia or China in the future. This is very alarming because it created a whole new era of instability in the world, and we have seen it since.
So you feel that the U.S. acted above regard for NATO and the UN?
Yes, not so much above NATO, because NATO does whatever the United States tells it to do, but it ignored the UN, and it continues to despise the UN. We see, this was true with Samantha Power and Barack Obama largely as well, but what we see now with Nikki Haley is an extraordinary contempt for the UN and for the modes of international diplomacy and reasonable dealing. This is very dangerous for the peace of the world.
And as you mentioned, with the addition of India and Pakistan, there are already several members of the SCO who are nuclear capable at the very least. What does this do in terms of safety for the world, security, and nuclear non-proliferation?
It's actually very good for nuclear safety in South Asia. India and Pakistan are both nuclear-powered nations. They're traditional enemies of each other. They see each other as existential threats. Now that they have both agreed to come into the SCO, it means they have effectively agreed to mediate all future conflicts with the input of Russia and China as well. This basically removes the threat of nuclear war for the foreseeable future from 20% of the human race in South Asia alone. So that is wonderful news. It is not bad news.
That is fascinating. And last but not least, real briefly, do you see the SEO Alliance as sort of foreshadowing of America's future as the preeminent world power in any way?
The United States lives in a multipolar world. It is not the hyperpower. It imagined it could ignore Russia and China. It could not. They imagined that India, because it was a democracy and English-speaking, would automatically do whatever the United States wanted it to. But India has now closely associated itself with Russia and China. It has joined the SCO. It's not going to join NATO or any equivalent of NATO in East Asia. We are in a multipolar world, and US policymakers, and especially the Congress, need to wake up to that fact and recognize it. They have to treat other major nations like Russia, China, India, Pakistan with respect.
As serious players on the global stage, and I think we're starting to see the shift, as you've pointed out so aptly in your article. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Martin